Why are your budgies not using the breeding box? This is one of the most common problems people face, and in many cases, the issue is not the breeding box itself, but something else that is stopping your birds from going inside. In my experience, I've seen many people add a breeding box and expect their budgies to use it straight away, but the birds completely ignore it. This can be frustrating, especially when everything looks right from the outside. In this video, I'm going to explain the real reasons why budgies don't use the breeding box, and what you can do to fix this properly and safely. So if your birds are ignoring the box or not showing any interest, make sure you watch this video until the end, because the solution is usually simpler than you think. One of the most common reasons why budgies don't use the breeding box is simply because they are not ready yet. A lot of people think that once they have a pair of birds, they can just add a breeding box and everything will start happening automatically, but in reality, it doesn't work like that. In my experience, birds need time to bond and feel comfortable with each other before they even think about breeding. For example, if your budgies are not sitting together, not feeding each other or not showing any close interaction, then they are most likely not ready. Another important sign is behavior. When birds are ready, they become more active, more connected, and you will clearly notice a difference in how they interact with each other. If these signs are not there, adding a breeding box will not help. In fact, the birds may completely ignore it. So instead of focusing on the box, it's always better to focus on your birds first and observe their behavior. In my experience, once birds are naturally ready, they will start showing interest in nesting areas on their own, and that is when things begin to change. So if your budgies are not using the breeding box, the first thing you should ask yourself is, are my birds actually ready? Sometimes people rush this stage because they want quick results, but patience is very important. When birds are ready naturally, everything becomes much easier and smoother. Another very common reason why budgies don't use the breeding box is wrong timing. Even if your birds are healthy and paired, putting the breeding box at the wrong time can make them ignore it completely. In my experience, timing is one of the biggest factors in successful breeding. For example, if you introduce the breeding box too early, before your birds are fully ready, they may not understand what to do with it, or they may simply avoid it. On the other hand, if the timing is right and your birds are already showing breeding behavior, they will usually accept the box much more quickly. This is why it's very important to observe your birds first, rather than rushing to add the box. A lot of people think the breeding box will start the process, but in reality, the birds need to be ready first, and the box just supports that natural behavior. In my experience, once I started focusing on timing instead of rushing, I noticed a big difference. Birds became more interested and started using the box naturally. So if your budgies are not using the breeding box, the timing could be the main issue, and waiting a little longer can often solve the problem. Sometimes people get impatient and keep checking or changing things, but in reality, giving your birds time is one of the most important parts of the process. Another very important reason why your budgies may not be using the breeding box is the environment they are in. Even if your birds are ready and healthy, a poor environment can stop them from feeling comfortable enough to breed. In my experience, budgies need a calm, stable and safe environment before they will even think about using a breeding box. For example, if your birds are in a place with too much noise, constant movement or frequent disturbance, they may feel stressed and avoid the box completely. Birds are very sensitive to their surroundings, and even small changes can affect their behavior. Another important factor is space. If the cage is too small or overcrowded, birds may not feel comfortable enough to settle and use the breeding box. Lighting also plays a role. Birds respond to natural light and routine, and if the environment is too dark or constantly changing, it can affect their readiness. In my experience, when I provided a calm and stable environment, I noticed my birds became more relaxed, more active and more interested in nesting areas. So if your budgies are not using the breeding box, take a step back and look at their environment, because this can often be the main reason. Even something simple like moving the cage too often or placing it in a busy area can affect your birds, so consistency is very important. Another very common reason why budgies don't use the breeding box is because their diet is not properly prepared for breeding. A lot of people focus only on the breeding box, but they forget that birds need the right nutrition before they are ready to breed. In my experience, diet plays a huge role in preparing budgies for breeding, and if the diet is not right, birds may not show any interest in the breeding box at all. For example, if your birds are only eating basic seeds without any extra nutrition, they may not have the energy or condition needed for breeding. Before breeding, birds need a richer diet, including soft food like boiled egg, soaked seeds and fresh vegetables. These foods help improve their strength and overall health, especially for the female, who needs extra nutrients for egg laying. Calcium is also very important, because it helps in forming strong eggs and keeps the female healthy. In my experience, once I improved the diet, I noticed a big change. Birds became more active, more connected and started showing interest in nesting areas. So if your budgies are ignoring the breeding box, don't just look at the box itself, look at their diet, because this is what prepares them internally for breeding. Sometimes people expect quick results, but improving diet takes a little time, so consistency is very important. Another reason why your budgies may not be using the breeding box is too much disturbance. In my experience, this is something many people don't realize they are doing, but it can have a big effect on the birds. For example, after adding a breeding box, people often keep checking inside, moving things around or getting too close to the cage. From the outside, it may feel like you are just observing, but for the birds, this can feel like a threat or disturbance. Budgies need to feel safe and undisturbed before they will use a breeding box, and if they don't feel secure, they may avoid it completely. Another thing is noise and activity around the cage. If the birds are in a busy area with constant movement, loud sounds or people coming close all the time, it can make them uncomfortable. In my experience, once I reduced disturbance and gave my birds more space and privacy, I noticed a big difference in their behavior. They became calmer, more relaxed and more interested in the breeding box. So if your budgies are not using the breeding box, ask yourself if you might be disturbing him too much, even without realizing it. Sometimes giving your birds space and leaving them alone is actually the best thing you can do, especially during breeding time. The last important reason why your budgies may not be using the breeding box is incorrect placement of the box itself. Even if everything else is right, a badly placed breeding box can stop birds from feeling comfortable enough to use it. In my experience, budgies prefer a breeding box that is placed in a quiet, stable and slightly higher position, where they feel safe and protected. For example, if the box is placed too low, in a very open area or in a spot where there is too much activity, birds may avoid it completely. Another common mistake is placing the box in a way that makes it difficult for birds to access or feel secure. The position should allow birds to approach it easily, while still feeling hidden and safe. In my experience, once I adjusted the placement of the breeding box, I noticed birds became more comfortable and started showing interest much more quickly. So if your budgies are not using the breeding box, don't just look at the birds. Look at where and how the box is placed, because this small detail can make a big difference. Sometimes even a small adjustment in position can completely change how your birds react, so it's always worth trying a better placement before making other changes. Another common question people have is how long it takes for budgies to start using the breeding box after you put it in. In my experience, this can be different for every pair. Some birds may show interest within a few days, while others can take a few weeks. This depends on how ready your birds are and how comfortable they feel in their environment. For example, if your birds are already bonded and showing breeding behavior, they may go inside the box quite quickly. But if they are not fully ready yet, they may ignore it for some time, and that is completely normal. The most important thing here is patience, because rushing or changing things too quickly can actually delay the process even more. In my experience, once I stopped checking constantly and just let the birds settle, they started using the box naturally. So if your birds are not using the box straight away, don't worry, give them time and let things happen naturally. There are also some clear signs that show your budgies are about to start using the breeding box. For example, you may notice the male bird feeding the female more often, which is a strong bonding behavior. You might also see the female spending more time near the box, going inside briefly or exploring it. Another sign is increased activity between the pair, such as sitting close together, making more sounds or following each other around. In my experience, once these signs start to appear, it usually means the birds are getting comfortable and ready to use the box. This is the stage where you should avoid disturbing them and just let the process continue naturally. So watching these small behavioral changes can give you a good idea of what's happening and what to expect next. One final thing to remember is the biggest mistake people make, and that is trying to force the process. Sometimes people keep changing the box, moving it around or checking inside too often because they want quick results. But in my experience, this usually does the opposite and makes the birds feel uncomfortable. Budgies need time, privacy and a stable environment to feel safe enough to breed. So instead of forcing things, it's always better to be patient and let your birds decide when they are ready. This simple approach can make a big difference in whether your birds use the breeding box or not. So overall, if your budgies are not using the breeding box, the problem is usually not the box itself, but something else like timing, environment, diet or disturbance. In my experience, once you focus on these small details and make the right adjustments, you will start to see a big difference in your bird's behavior. Breeding is not something you force, it happens naturally when your birds feel ready, safe and comfortable. So instead of rushing, take your time, observe your birds and make small improvements step by step. I hope this video helped you understand the real reasons behind this problem and how to fix it properly. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you in the next video.